There's something about strength finders that really it created a pivot point in my life that after that point, like nothing was the same. And I think there was two main things I got out of it. And I encourage all of you guys to take these assessments. But the first thing was that I realized that we all have strengths and we all have weaknesses, right? Everybody does. And no matter how great you think you are as an entrepreneur, you're not great at everything.
Hey everyone, welcome to UAC's Best Practices Podcast. We're hoping, this is the idea, the concept is that we bring one of our special guests on that has a little nugget that you can take, internalize, and put into practice right away and make a big impact in your practice and your community. So I'm here today with my co-host, Dr. Alan Miner, and I'll let him take it away from here.
Thanks, Dr. Brian.
Yeah.
Today our guest is Dr. Eric DiMartino, and I think I've known Eric as long as I've been in UAC for 13, 14,
Same.
15 years. I've watched Eric go through different. When I first met you, Eric, I was laughing. You had a chain of gyms at one point, which just seems like a lifetime ago knowing you. True for people in UAC, you're an entrepreneur at heart. But Eric, was the president of the Michigan Chiropractic Association of Chiropractors. He owns multiple clinics in the Detroit area. He's also a coach with TRP. So what's interesting, you being a coach, Eric, I'm curious to hear what you bring to us, because it's not only what you see in your clinics, but you see inside of dozens and dozens of other clinics. So best practice, what comes to mind?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things obviously we could speak to, but I think the one that I find, especially working with TRP clients, that seems to be a big sticking point, especially for successful chiropractic entrepreneurs, is really assembling great teams and learning how to delegate effectively. And the key word being effectively, because I see some messes when people try to delegate and it's not done in an effective way. So, I've been in practice almost 23 years now. And the first 10 or so years of my career was me being that control freak entrepreneur who did everything myself, right? I was happy to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week because I was like, I'm the man. It was an ego trip. I built a great practice. But the problem was it wasn't a great business, right? It was all dependent on me. If I wasn't there, nothing happened. And that ego trip went away really quickly when my kids started to grow up, and I missed all their soccer games and all their dance recitals because I was literally tied to the office. And I remember, I think it was about 13 or 14 years ago, I was exposed to something called strength finders. And it's a type of personal assessment that you can take that basically ranks your 34 talents that we all have to some extent. It ranks in order from 1 to 34. And I was actually introduced this by Dr. Mark Mao and Dr. Lynn Mao, who are obviously UAC people as well. And, I've taken different personal assessments like DISC and, some other things I'm sure our listeners have taken as well. But there's something about strength finders that really, it created a pivot point in my life that after that point, like nothing was the same. And I think there was two main things I got out of it. And I encourage all of you guys to take these assessments. But the first thing was that I realized that we all have strengths and we all have weaknesses, right? Everybody does. And no matter how great you think you are as an entrepreneur, you're not great at everything. And so the key was to get very clear on what my strengths were and what my weaknesses were. And then to take the next step was to actually then find people where their strengths were my weaknesses and then delegate to them. See, I thought that as an entrepreneur, it had to be on my shoulders, right? There's things I was going to love about my business and things I was going to hate about it. And that just was the necessary evil of being in business. And I lived like that for, like I said, for a decade. And it served me somewhat financially, but it didn't serve my life very well, and especially my family life. And so once I learned that, I was like, wow, so I can actually hire people who their strengths are my weaknesses and delegate, and now we're all working in our strengths. Because that was a bit of a foreign concept for me, because just like you guys, growing up, elementary school, high school, we had our report cards that had our grades, right? And those grades would be like, for always me, it was always like an A in math, A in science, but like a C in English, right? And so our teachers wouldn't tell me, hey, Eric, you know what? You're really good at math and science, so just ignore the English, right? That's not your strength, just forget that. They wouldn't say that. They would say, what do we have to do? Work on bringing that English grade up. So I thought that's just how things were. But Strength Finders said something very different. They said we all have strengths and weaknesses. The key is to identify your strengths and only work in your strengths, right? Forget about the English grade. You're good at math and science. Focus on that. but then hire people that you can delegate the English stuff to, that's their strength. And now we're all working on our strengths, right? Because we clearly have strengths for a reason. It's we're good at it and we probably enjoy doing it. So imagine if you could create a business where every day you and everybody in your team gets to do the things they love to do and they're really, really good at. That's how you set up a business for success. I think that's one of my biggest challenges with my coaching clients is to help them understand that, where they get really, really clear on that, how important that actually is. And, once I really dialed this in, I started to realize that my time is not best served doing a lot of the stuff in my practice. I remember our common friend, Ken Stillwell, he spoke at UAC probably 5 or 6 years ago, and he talked about how he said that you probably should only be doing about 20% of the stuff in your business. And that blew my mind, right? Especially for a small business. Now, if you had a 50, 60 person operation, I could see that. But, a business of less than 10 employees, to think I should only be doing 20% kind of blew my mind. But it makes total sense when you really dive into this stuff. And so I started to realize, like, how can I buy my time back? Right? There's a great book by Dan Martell called Buy Back Your Time. I will put this in the top 5 of all entrepreneurial books. If you guys have not read it, I highly recommend. It's up there with it's up there with the E-Myth and Traction, those kind of books. It's called Buy Back Your Time. And what he talks about in that is that our goal is we want to buy back our time by finding people that we can delegate to. And he actually has a buyback rate, he calls it, where he says if you can pay somebody to delegate the stuff that you're not good at to, and you can pay them four times less than what you're worth, you should do it, right? So you should calculate what your time is worth. Let's say your time is worth $250 an hour, right? So that means you divide that by 4, that's roughly $65 an hour. If you can pay somebody $65 or less an hour to do that task, you should absolutely delegate it, right? And so you're buying back your time to leverage yourself so you can start focusing on those higher leveraged activities that you can do to drive the business. And it's so hard getting this through to people. It was tough for myself at first, but for working with so many docs, like I try to get through to them because they'll be like doing phone calls and they'll be doing paperwork at the front desk and doing these types of things. And it's like, what would you pay somebody? What would you pay a CA to do that? And they'll say something like, probably $20 an hour, but you're doing it. So you're basically paying yourself $20 an hour to do that job. And that's kind of like, holy cow. Go ahead, Brian.
You said something in the beginning, delegate and effectively. So the really important point, because as you know, I've been through quite a bit building our company. And I think a lot of doctors, especially when the first hear that concept, it's basically like, okay, so I just hire somebody and tell them to do the thing I'm not good at, right? But that's a very efficient, but it's not effective. What do you mean by effective?
So effective is identifying their strengths and weaknesses, right? So we only want to delegate to people where it's their strength. And so as entrepreneurs, sometimes we don't hire very well, and we hire people like us because we like us. And that's the last thing you want to do, right? You want to hire people that complement you, right? So my strengths are their weaknesses and vice versa. Because if I hire 2 Erics, we're going to be really, really good at these things, but we're going to suck at everything else. So we tell people, you don't have to be awesome at everything. You just have to build a team that's awesome at everything. And that's getting very clear on your strengths and your weaknesses. So in TRP, and it's part of Traction, we talk about the 4 rights. When getting the right team, right? It's getting the right person, 8 players only, getting them in the right role based on their zone of genius. So as CEOs, our job is to identify that zone of genius and then put them in the right seat so they can express their zone of genius. Right? Because I know I've made the mistake of hiring a person who I thought was going to be a great new patient concierge. And then I found out a couple months into it, I'm like, wow, I thought this was an A player, but they're coming across as a B or C player. And then I realized that they're not a new patient concierge, they're a checkout CA. So we moved them to checkout CA, suddenly they flourish, they're an A player. Now, was it their fault? That was my fault as a CEO for not putting them in the right seat on the bus. And so that's what I mean delegating effectively. Delegating your weaknesses to people with their strengths.
And then I think I've seen, and I've done it myself, thinking of delegation, but really just abdicating responsibility. And I know you guys are really big on this, but how do you know that person is doing the job effectively that you want them to do? How do you know that you, like you said, how do you know when you did it wrong? Beside just your feelings, right? I know you guys do this really well on TRP, so I'll let you take it on that.
Yeah. So we kind of have a step-by-step process to delegate effectively, right? So the first step we talk about, identify then delegate. So identify means identify the task you want to delegate and identify the person that fits in their zone of genius, right? Then you delegate it, but we don't stop there. Then it's delegate, then train. Right? We have to actually train them so they can actually execute this task effectively. But we don't stop there. Then it's train, then trust. Right? We have to trust that they can do the job effectively. If we put them in their zone of genius and we've trained them, we have to trust you cannot micromanage people. If you micromanage A players, they will leave you, right? And so I see a lot of micromanaging entrepreneurs that have a bunch of B and C players on their team. And so it's all about the owner, and they have a couple of assistants that just support them. But that's no way to build a great business, as you guys know. And so it's after the train, then trust. We don't stop there. Then it's trust, then verify. And that's speaking of what you talk about, Brian. We have to verify in the back end through different statistical tools or accountability charts, ways to know that they are actually effectively executing these things that we delegated without us having to be over their shoulder.
Awesome.
Well said, Eric. I appreciate it. Last question. Our favorite, UAC. What's it meant to you? Why have you stayed in that group, and how have you benefited from it?
Yeah, so I was actually thinking about this month. It'll be 11 years since I joined UAC. It was December of 2013. Well, for many reasons. First of all, it's the greatest group of chiropractors I get to hang out with. They're just awesome people, great families. So there's the friend component, which is huge. Some of my best friends are now in UAC. But also the learning, the up leveling component. Like, we go to these UAC events, and the speakers and all the organized stuff is great, but some of the greatest benefits is the talks in between the meetings or after, when we're having drinks at the bar or having dinner together and talking to so many just unbelievably intelligent, creative chiropractors. They're doing so many cool things in their businesses that I would never have thought of, right? And so I feel like I get so much ideas from them, and hopefully I can give them ideas as well. But like we talked about, strengths and weaknesses, there's so much different genius in that room, and we say that a lot. There's genius in the room of different geniuses. So you get to pick the brains of so many intelligent people, chiropractors operating at a really, really high level, and it's a great way to up level. Right? I think it's Tony Robbins, or a lot of people say that you are the sum of the 5 people you hang out with. And so I want to be hanging out with UAC people, because that's a great group of people.
Awesome, Eric. Well,
Thanks, brother.
We're all better for having you be around us. So thank you for your wisdom today, as always, man. And thanks for your time, E.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you so much.